Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Tufail, and today's class we will talk about literary movements, and then we in detail discuss what classicism is and what is the impact of classicism in English literature. If you recall my previous classes, I told you that initially we looked at literature with the help of criticism, and in criticism we discussed various critics who were authority on literature, may it be Plato, Aristotle, Longinus, Dantes, Horace, and later on in English literature we talked about Philip Sidney, and there was a Dryden and Dr. Johnson, then Matthew Arnold, then T.S. Eliot, and these different writers in new criticism, formalism. So in that literature, we in criticism we saw that these different critics they tried to interpret literature in a different perspective. But what are the movements? Movements help us to understand when the literature was written. Whenever the writers they try to write something, definitely literature is followed by social, political, economic, cultural, psychological, religious conditions and circumstances, and they impact on literature, and literature impacts them. As literature impacts life, and life impacts literature. Sometimes literature guides life, sometimes life guides literature. Sometimes literature comes solutions for the life, and sometimes life proposes different new areas for literature to deal with. So this is a reciprocal, and this inter crossroads they go on and on, and they provide us opportunities to analyze or understand literature. So with after the period of canon, we will try to understand literature with the help of different movements. But later on, in the 20th century, we came up with this another arena that is called literary theories. So after is learning these criticism and movements, literary movements, then you have to enter the field of literary theories in which you have to deal with the feminism, you have to deal with the Marxist feminism, you have to deal with the formalism, you have to deal with new criticism, then you have to deal with structuralism, then post-structuralism, modernism, postmodernism, or you have to deal with the psychoanalysis theories, or you have to analyze literature with the help of post-colonial theories, or even you have to analyze literature with the help of historicism. So these are the different theories what you have to discuss in future when you would study literature with the help of these theories, and that will be the areas what you have to cover in your final year. So this was the background of our subject. We talked too much many theories there in the class, and hope you would remember that. And now today we will focus on what is classicism and how it came. Classicism basically was a literary movement, and this movement started in the literature, especially in the English literature, when we call a new classicism, but in that is in 18th century. And in this artists they drive, they basically they actually this movement is connected with ancient right. May they be Greece, may they be Roman. And when we talk about Greece or ancient, we mean Homer and then Aeschylus, then Euripides, or Executed Plato, Aristotle, Longinus. So these were the writers and were the period when things were considered up to the mark, and it was considered to be an era which could be copied or which could be traced back in human life. So then it came also in English literature, there came a period when the writers, especially after Reformation period, after Milton age, Then we have age of a new classicism, and this new classicism, and in age of new classicism, we have a three main figures: the age of Dryden, then that begins with the 1660, then there's the age of a Pope, and then there's the age of Dr. Johnson, and it ends with 1832 up to the age of William Wordsworth. So after new classicism, the Romanticism would begin. So this basically this movement is connected with these ancient writers. Actually, it is a fact that ancient writers they wrote their literature very creatively, and they had a wonderful balance between thought and in their feelings, emotions, and they were quite perfect in their form and structure. So were they quite they were in their ideas, and so was their outcome in a feeling. So this was a fantastic blend, a unique blend of ideas, and emotions, and rules, and things were moving with such a balance that it looked very wonderful. But if, when we talk about English literature, then the classics, okay, they simply copied, okay, they were not that much the two writers, but then they. So classicism basically is a specific genre philosophy. This expresses itself in literature, architectures, art, and music. Actually means we try to connect that how the in the history of antiquity or the past models, the models which were coined maybe by Greek, by Roman. In the it's, here our concern is literature, but classicism not only encompass literature, it also aids or it also talks about philosophy, architectures, art, and music, because these fields could also be traced back to the history of antiquity, to the history of ancient period. So this is how it got connected with this thing. So this classicism basically connects this in the ideas of the past, and in that 18th century, what we call the new classicism was the age of enlightenment. Here it is very important if you will look at the philosophical or cognitive journey of Europe. Look at that. It started, the Anglo-Saxon period started with 450 AD, and then it was a period of religiosity. Papaism was there, and religion was these ecclesiastical figures. They were very much corrupt, and the people were living in the dark ages. So after that period of dark ages, when English people they started to developed. Then there was a movement of humanism, whose father was a Boccaccio, Petrarch. These people they started to talk about human. Human means humanism. Humanism means let's talk about human. Previously, they were talking about supernatural characters. They were going to talk about metaphysical figures. So this is the time when we are switching from metaphysical and this is a this supernatural elements. They are moving to talk about human. So this was called the humanism. They said now to stop talking about these witches and fairies and dragons and etc. Let's talk about people and let's talk about human. When they started to deal with the problem of humanity or human, they entered into the age of humanism or the movements of humanism. And this humanism, when progressed and developed, it brought the new phenomena in Europe, what we call a renaissance, the movements of the renaissance. That was a rebirth of knowledge and a revival of knowledge when they got every past knowledge converted and changed, and then they moved forward. Okay, so then they came into the period of even this Reformation. They got rid of papaism. They get rid of this churchianity, and they introduced a bit moderate and liberal sort of church, what we call Protestant school of thought in Christianity. And after this period, Milton's period, we entered into the age of what we call the age of, politically we call it the age of restoration, but from scientific point of view we call it the age of enlightenment. Why? Because the science and religion basically was a kind of hurdle. So the Protestant they rejected the supremacy of a church, and they brought a sort of a liberty or liberalism in the church and the ecclesiastical figure of that church. And besides scientist people they started to emerge, And it was the time when the printing press was established. They started to translate books from every literature, may it be Greece, may it be Roman, may it be Arabic, may it be Indian. So they collected works from all languages in the past civilization, translated into English, and started giving to people for reading because printing press was available. Now, writing books was not that much difficult as it used to be. So they moved forward after this Renaissance revival. They entered into the age of Enlightenment, and the science came into existence. And Copernicus' theory of geocentric rejected, and he introduced the heliocentric. Means Earth is not the center, but the sun is the center of the this. So with the introduction of this heliocentric theory, then they came to the another idea, Galileo Galilei, Giordano Bruno, Joan of Arc, and other scientists they started to talk about. So this is called the Age of Enlightenment, when the people have ideas, they started to somehow think. Now, see, by these all things what we talked about in the realm of a science, etc., one thing became obvious that your mind is important. Whatever things you can think, you can choose, you can analyze, you can decide, but only mind is the source that could. So this helped them to move forward into digital life. So basically, this is a movement, and this movement moved forward after covering these areas what I talked about, and then they started to come across these areas when this empiricism and humanism and realism and formalism. These things are going to give classicism is going to give birth to this type of things. When you can talk about what is empiricism, when they started to study with the help of empirical fact and all the studies of science, they are empirical studies when facts are discussed. How can we conduct empirical studies? Suppose how many people got affected by COVID, and how this hepatitis B is going to affect people, how many people are got affected, and what is the appropriate treatment, etc. How can we teach students properly? So these all studies they would fall into the area of empirical. When you conduct experiment, that is the source where the science is changed for. They talk about empirical thoughts, and they talk about empiricism, humanism. I have already explained. Realism was that what we call when realism is very important to understand. Realism also a movement, and later on I will give one complete lecture on realism. And that realism basically talks about how reality should be presented, because what is a reality? It was not in supernatural characters or in supernatural stories. We didn't focus on reality. Reality was ignored. It was not presented properly. So they started to talk about this as well. Then we have this formalism, and this formalism movements later on paved way for structuralism, and that also there was a counter narrative of structuralism that came post-structuralism. But these type of movements, they were the main roots which got birth from this idea of a classical ideas, classicism, and it's based on reason. Reason is everything. There should be order. They talk about order. They talk about the uniqueness or correctness should be there. The logic is very much there, and you can see that the things which are connected with, they are rather connected with human reason. I mean, they are talking about the supremacy of the human mind, and up to Hegel, these all philosophers, may it be Locke, John Locke, or they even Spinoza to somehow, and then you have this got this Hegel. These type of writers, they believed that human can progress, human can develop with the help of their mind, with the proper use of their cognitive power, with their intellectual power, their mental power. They can use the things, they can change the world, and everything in the world could be changed with the help of human mind. And mind was considered superior. And mind, in a mind we had ideas, and everything was considered to be an idea. Idea was important, and with the help of a creative ideas we can make this world wonderful. And so these ideas basically they emerge from human tradition. Tradition is that what is transferring to you from generation to generation. So this tradition was considered superior. And actually, another thing, nature here is considered as a machine. Means even the nature, in the nature, they found that there's laws. The laws are going to govern the nature. It's not a time when you are going to give priority to your emotions. It's not age of emotions, age of mind, age of reason. And here, nature is not like a revolution or that is disruptive or this kind of inspirational part of a nature. Nature is a both things. It inspires you as well, and it also terrifies you in the form of storms and in the form of earthquake. So nature is malign, nature is a benign. Both possibilities are there in the nature, but these people they are just going to treat nature as a machine. And that nature is methodized. How to methodize? When you nature in a jungle is in its natural or real form. When you saw the nature, the trees and plants in the jungle, but when do you bring these all trees in the park of your university or park of your house, then what you do, you put that raw shape of a nature into proper order. That changes the society, and that is another kind of as means a phenomena or manifestations of a nature. So for the classist, nature is not a kind of a what we call, it is not a kind of wild in its nature, but it's organized, it's methodized, it's like a park type of nature and everything. And there's a rule to make a park. So in the park, the nature that is a wild, this is without shape, you give it proper shape into your park, and that makes the supremacy. This marks the supremacy of your intellectual power, and this how. So these were the main ideas where this they focused on. And then these basically this classical writers, as I mentioned, we talked about Homer, we talked about Iliad and Odyssey written by Homer. Aeneas, they are Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, Euripides, Aristophanes, Horace, Ovid. So these are the classical writers. Okay, they wrote dramas, they wrote poetry, and even they wrote the criticism. So their poetry was a role model to be followed. Their dramas became role model to be followed. Their criticism became role model to be followed. So they tried to connect creativity or creative literatures with that thing, and they took them as a model. And the modern English writer, they tried to copy them, and they consider that this is the classical writers who are the real writers. So they should be followed in their work. So this is the root where they thought it was a literature's function to show the everyday value of humanity and the law of human existence. They just are the legislative, and they have a laws, and they follow the laws, and everything is the laws. May it be human mind, may it be society, but these all things are the product of that, and these laws are there, and we have to follow these laws, and we have to accept these laws. We have to promulgate, and we have to promote these laws. And it was based on that the natures and the human natures could be understood by reason and thought. Here, look at that. May it be human nature, may it be the nature in your surrounding, but everything you can understand with the help of the reason. So, mind is important, not a heart. We are not talking about emotion. They believe that through emotions you can't understand this word, but through mind you can. So, it is the age of supremacy of a mind. Mind is the dominant, and they are simply going to follow the supremacy of this. And so based test on reason, they followed the three unities of a time, place, action. You remember in drama we talked about the three unities. A unity of a time means that every play should end within 24 hours. Place where it begins, it should end there. And the action means there shouldn't be a kind of a variety in the action in the play. If it is a drama, if it is a comedy, it should be comedy from beginning up to end. If it is a tragedy, it should be tragedy from beginning up to end. So they followed the three unities, and they were very strict. Okay, they were very strict in this respect. Used strict, rigid, and logical dictions um, uh, and theme for them. These things were quite solid, and they didn't allow to to just deviate like this, okay? And any deviations in this respect, it was not considered. So they didn't allow anything, and these laws and these everything was fixed there. Okay, let's just thought of the world as having a rigid and stern structure. What is their idea, the prominent idea? They believe that everything in this world has a structures, and these structures are important, and everything has got a form, may it be universe. Then again, universe is governed by certain rules, may it be atom. Again, atom is governed by certain rules. So electrons are moving around the nucleus. Then again, other particles, they have their way, their rules to stronger force, weaker force, magnetic force or gravitational force. Everything is bound. Everything is to follow these rules. These rules are important. So as the rules are important to maintain the natural course of things in this entire cosmos, so is the necessary for human life. Human life could only be covered with the control with the help of these rules. So they moved forward, okay. They believed in reason, they emphasized the civilization, and there was the modern life was there. They believed in sophistications, they believed in the rules and interest in the urban city. Because you know that this is also kind of a trend. They gave much importance to the urban cities. Why? The question was that it was the age of urban cities when the urban people they were considered educated people. So education was considered with human mind, and they consider these people as educated people. So they were simply the centers of learning as well. This is how, and the preoccupation with the human nature. Now, see here, one thing is important for them. Man is, human nature is important, and you can uh, just make it with the help of mind and like that. And they express this. There's a satirical tendency and expressions of accepted moral truth is there. You have to follow this truth, okay? And there's a realistic recognitions of things as they are, and belief in good and evil, okay? These are the common features, and the established facts were there, philosophical creeds, attachments to normalcy, and generic abstractions. There was impersonal objectivity. Here, you see, what is impersonal objectivity means that everything is objective for them, life, death, etc. Everything is connected with this thing, and everything is impersonal. You don't need to be subjective. It's not your personal ideas, it's not your personal emotions which are going to establish the things, but reality is objective. This reality which is objective up to classicism, but when you would enter into the age of postmodernism, this reality would not remain objective, it would turn to become subjective. In modern and postmodern period, in modern modernism, we would try to enter human mind or something that's subjective, because objective reality cause problem in life. So we switch to a subjective reality. But we will discuss this phenomena when we will enter into these movements of especially modernism and then postmodernism. Here, my focus is that the reality is objective, and it could be understood with the help of a mind. And you must remember that Hegel and other type of philosophers, they believe कि मुश्किल में मुश्किल जो चीज़ है उसको भी हम अपने दिमाग का इस्तेमाल करके समझ सकते हैं. There's a solution to every problem, and by the help of your cognitive power you can resolve to these issues, or you can solve the problem. So this was that correctness is there, the ideal for order, and this is ideal beauty means they have there, okay, this popularity of poetry, of a prose statements, the use of formal poetic dictions and self-conscious traditionalism. These people, they were using bombastic language, they were inane phraseology, and the godliness was there in their write-up. They were full of complicated dictions and complicated ideas, and they believed that literature and poetry was not for a common man and layman, so it must be within a difficult languages, etc. That was their kind of view. And out of this, these movements, as I mentioned, the rationalism started out of this classicism. What's the rationalism? When they started to rationalize the things, that was the reason behind that thing. And this also gave another practice of scholarly allusion. Allusion is that कि माजी के किसी भी किताब के तारीखी हवाले को कोट करना, तो ये allusion कहलाता है. That's a type of way you. So scholarly allusion. People started to quote from the works of Socrates and sorry, Socrates didn't wrote himself, didn't write anything, but his disciple Plato. So the work of Plato, work of Aristotle, or sometimes from Homer, or sometimes from Iliad, some from Odyssey, they started to quote. Okay? And this quotation became a kind of a traditions in our scholarly knowledge. And nowadays, you know that this allusions, what we call reference, quotation, they have too much weight in the present day research studies what we are using. And it also introduced realism, and we started to talk about reality. We stopped imagination. We stopped talking about imaginative things. We stopped things talking about the things which were the only product of human imagination. It was a time when we started to talk about human reality, realism, and it also introduced this adherence to classical rules, the rules of antiquity, and they become superior for the writers. And the writers they took them as a kind of means guiding principles, and they try to imitate, to copy, or is to impose or enforce and implement these classical rules in their work. They become very dominant for them. So this is how they develop forward. And then we come to the age of this is English classicism. And actually we talk about English classicism that we call it new classicism. Here it's very important to understand that what's a new classicism and pseudo classicism. Why do we call it neoclassicism? The reason is that these all writers, they were trying to become a classist in their attitude, but actually just they are called as a neoclassist. They are called as a pseudo-classist. Why we call them as a pseudo-classist? Because they couldn't produce this literature which was that much scientific and understandable, but they simply tried to put things, they simply copied these writers, and it was simple imitations, copy. They only formed these forms and structures and orders as it was. There was originality was concealed. You know, they were not original in their tone, and they written to the perceived purity, but it was not a purity. Just वो pure समझ रहे थे वो हकीकत में pure नहीं था. And their belief and tradition. So these things they caused problem in their writing, and they couldn't end up as a good writers. Okay, so there's a difference between classicism and neoclassicism. Neoclassicism was the real classicism. It's based on form and regional beauty and simplicity and beauty and society, belief in good and evil, religion, interest in urban society. These are the characteristics what the real classism bore and advocate. But on the contrary, the new classist in which Dryden and Dr. Johnson's and Pope they emphasize only imitations were there. There was a formal structures, but were not that much beautiful. And non-relevant themes they started to talk about means they limited their themes, okay, and their belief in a secular and nationality because they didn't believe in a universality and other things that traditions and the purity of past that was thing, but they were not creative in the creative use of a past. You know that everything in a past can't be the good or bad. We have to choose that what was the good, and we have to discriminate like this. So these are the some of the things where this romanticism and classicism they would agree, and then again there was a kind of a contradiction between romanticism and classicism. So in the wake of a classicism, इनके जो opposition में जो new classics के opposition में movement launch हुई तो romanticism थी. For example, classical people they talked about ideas, and romantics talked about emotions. Classicists believed in just a limited use of imagination. And the romantic people they talked about excessive use of imagination. They talked about mind. Classicists, romanticists talked about emotions, and experience was everything was everything for a classist writer, but the experience was something, experiment was something important for the romantics. So the classist talked about status quo, the romantic talked about revolution. So this is how we find. And nature was limited in a classical writer, so it was rather methodized. But in a romantic writer, you find that nature is there to inspire you, to guide you, and it is present in its raw form, in a wild shape, like Ode to Melancholy, and there was Ode to West Wind, and Ode to Autumn, and these type of things. You will find that nature in its raw form there in a romantic writer. So this is the basic differences, and we would also talk about these basic differences between romanticism and classicism in our work as well. But here they are, okay. The classical, new classes, they focused on ideas, city life, whereas they talked about emotions. Classes talked about city life, They talked about countryside, a rustic life, a rural life. They talked about rules. They talked about themes. For them, simple imagination. For them, excessive imagination. And with the help of these excessive imagination, they invented unusual things and very much peculiar sort of things were created there. And they avoiding excessive use of nature, but the nature was excessively used in its wild shape by the romantics. And they talked about status quo. Status quo means चीजें जैसी हैं वैसे रहने दो. But they talked about revolution, something new, something great to be done. And they talked about experience, means look at the things as it is. But these people, they talked about experience, means to look at the things from a different perspective. So classicism basically ended with a romanticism. And in our next class, we talked about what romanticism is and how romanticism affected literature and how it left its impact on the different studies. So thank you very much for your passion listening. And through this lecture series, I would be sending you material along with these recorded lectures. So lectures and material will help you to learn at your home till that we are allowed to be together. Take good care of yours. Thank you very much. Love you all. Allah Hafiz.